the man who Hollywood calls the nicest guy in the business hasn't smiled genuinely in 15 years. Behind every kind gesture Keanu Reeves makes, giving millions to crew members, taking pay cuts for co-stars, riding the subway like a regular person, lies a pain so deep that those closest to him say he's essentially been performing happiness since 1999. What you're about to discover will shatter everything you thought you knew about Hollywood's most beloved action star. From unimaginable losses that would break most people, to a diagnosis he's hidden from everyone. This is why Keanu Reeves gives everything away. Because he's already lost everything that mattered. If Keanu ever made you believe in good people, leave a like below. There's a darkness in Keanu Reeves' childhood that shaped everything. Watching his father abandon the family when he was 3, leaving behind heroin needles in the bathroom and a void that would never be filled. Long before the world would know him as Hollywood's most genuine soul, he was Keanu Charles Reeves in Beirut, Lebanon, learning that love meant leaving and fathers were just temporary visitors. Keanu was born on September 2, 1964, to Patricia Taylor, a British costume designer, and Samuel Nolan Reeves Jr., a Hawaiian Chinese geologist who preferred heroin to his family. His father left in 1967, disappearing so completely that Keanu wouldn't see him again for decades. Patricia moved them constantly, Australia, New York, Toronto, dragging Keanu through 5 stepfathers before he turned 13, each one teaching him that male figures were interchangeable and temporary. The constant upheaval meant Keanu attended 4 different high schools, expelled from one for being a little too rambunctious, though teachers suspected it was undiagnosed dyslexia making him act out. He couldn't read properly until he was 14, hiding his struggle by becoming the class clown, the kid who'd do anything for a laugh because laughter meant nobody looked too closely. School was torture, Keanu would later admit. Every letter was a puzzle, every sentence a maze. I felt stupid every single day. Hockey became his escape. On ice, dyslexia didn't matter. His broken family didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the next shot. His mother, Patricia, cycling through marriages and careers, offered little stability. She'd disappear into costume work for rock bands, leaving teenage Keanu to essentially raise himself. He worked nights at a pasta restaurant, managing the venue at 15, lying about his age to get shifts that would pay rent. I learned that you could only depend on yourself, he reflected decades later. Everyone else was just passing through. When his best friend River Phoenix asked him years later why he never talked about his father, Keanu simply said, "What father? I had a sperm donor who chose needles over knowing me." The abandonment manifested in ways that would shadow him forever. An inability to trust permanence, a need to give everything away, because keeping things meant they could be taken, a conviction that everyone he loved would eventually leave. His stepfathers ranged from indifferent to abusive. One particularly violent man who'd lock Keanu in closets for hours as punishment. "I learned to go somewhere else in my mind," he once told a therapist, "to disappear inside myself. It's a skill that served me well in acting, but destroyed me in real life." By 17, Keanu had dropped out of high school, deciding that if everyone was going to leave anyway, he might as well leave first. He moved into a tiny apartment, working 3 jobs while auditioning for anything that would pay. The boy who'd been abandoned by his father, ignored by his mother, and rejected by the education system, had learned the most crucial lesson of his life. Expecting nothing meant you could never be disappointed. That philosophy would carry him through Hollywood, through unimaginable losses, through a life where the only constant was impermanence. The child who learned that fathers were myths and homes were temporary would become the man who gave everything away, because he'd learned that holding on to anything was just postponing the inevitable loss. At 22, Keanu Reeves stood outside the Barrymore Theater in New York, having just been fired from his first professional stage role for refusing to lose his Canadian accent, told by the director he had the stage presence of furniture and should consider manual labor. The year was 1986, and Keanu had driven from Toronto to New York in a 1969 Volvo that died the moment he parked it, carrying everything he owned in 2 garbage bags and $3,000 he'd saved from working as a landscaper. He slept in that dead Volvo for 3 weeks until it was towed, then moved to a YMCA, where he paid daily rates because committing to a week felt too optimistic. There was no plan B, he would later admit with characteristic simplicity. Either I acted or I ceased to exist. And most days, ceasing to exist seemed more likely. Those first years were exercises in specific humiliation. Keanu's dyslexia made cold readings disasters. He'd stumble over simple words, transpose entire sentences, sometimes hold scripts upside down without realizing. Casting directors dismissed him as pretty but vacant, all surface, no depth. A mannequin who somehow learned to walk. One particularly brutal audition for a soap opera ended with the casting director saying, "You're what we call furniture. You fill space but serve no purpose." He auditioned for over 300 roles between 1984 and 1986, landing exactly one. A Coca-Cola commercial where he had no lines, just had to look refreshed. The breakthrough from invisibility came through sheer proximity and desperation. Keanu worked as a production assistant on other people's films, hauling equipment for 16 hours to watch how movies were made. So he'd stay after wrap, reading sides with anyone who'd practice with him, slowly learning to memorize rather than read, turning his disability into a different kind of skill. His first film role came in 1986 Youngblood, playing a goalkeeper. No lines, just reaction shots. $3,000 that seemed like fortune. Rob Lowe, the star, later recalled, "Keanu was so hungry for knowledge, he'd ask about everything. Lighting, camera angles, craft services. We thought he was weird. Turns out he was studying." The real shift came through a casting director who saw him bomb an audition but noticed something in his failure. "You're not good," she told him, "but you're present in a way that's unusual. Stop trying to act. Just be." That advice led to River's Edge in 1986, where Keanu played a teenager confronting a friend's murder. He prepared by not preparing, showing up exhausted from insomnia, letting his natural disconnection become the character. The film earned critical acclaim, with critics calling him naturally unsettling, not knowing his performance was just Keanu being himself, lost, searching, pretending to understand emotions he couldn't access. But fate's strangest gift came in 1987 when he was cast in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure after everyone else passed. The role required someone who could be genuinely confused by everything, deliver idiotic lines with sincerity, and make stupidity charming. Keanu wasn't acting. His dyslexia made him process information differently. His abandonment issues made him desperately eager to please. His natural disconnection made Ted's spaciness authentic. The film sat unreleased for 2 years, studios convinced it was unwatchable. Then it earned $40 million against a $10 million budget. And suddenly, Keanu Reeves wasn't furniture anymore. He was a movie star, though he'd spend the next decade trying to convince people he was more than just Ted, unaware that soon he'd face losses that would make career struggles seem like blessings. The role of John Wick wasn't supposed to resurrect Keanu Reeves's career. It was a $20 million action film that every major star had rejected, directed by stuntmen nobody trusted, about a man who kills 77 people because someone shot his dog. Keanu was 49, considered past his action prime, taking the role because he needed the work after a string of failures. Studios wanted him replaced with someone younger, more relevant. The directors, Chad Stahelski and David Leitch, fought for him because they'd been his stunt doubles on The Matrix and knew something others had forgotten. Keanu's physical commitment bordered on self-destruction. He had exactly 4 months to prepare, learning judo, jiu-jitsu, and tactical firearms training that would normally take years. Behind the scenes, Keanu was channeling grief into violence with terrifying authenticity. His preparation wasn't just physical. It was psychological excavation of losses he'd never processed. The character's dead wife, Helen, was modeled after Jennifer Syme, Keanu's partner who died in 2001. The dog represented their stillborn daughter, Ava. "I wasn't acting," Keanu would later admit to Stahelski. "I was just showing what I'd been feeling for 13 years. He trained 8 hours daily, refusing stunt doubles for everything except car hits. He learned to reload weapons in under 2 seconds, to make killing look like poetry. The famous nightclub sequence required him to memorize 96 specific moves performed in real time, no cuts, while maintaining the dead expression of a man with nothing left to lose. The physical toll was deliberate self-punishment. Keanu fractured 2 ribs during training, but didn't tell anyone. He dislocated his shoulder in the second week, reset it himself, continued fighting. The stunt team later revealed he'd performed scenes with injuries that would sideline professional athletes. "Pain helped me find John," Keanu explained. "When everything hurts, you stop pretending anything matters." He'd arrive at 4 a.m. for 4 hours of training before 12-hour shoots, then stay late perfecting moves nobody would notice. The production bought him a custom back brace he wore under his suit because standing straight became agony by week 3. When John Wick released in October 2014, even Keanu's desperate hopes couldn't have predicted the resurrection. The film earned $86 million worldwide against its modest budget, but more importantly, it redefined action cinema. Critics who'd written him off suddenly called him mesmerizing, the only actor who could make murder look mournful. The franchise would eventually earn over $1 billion. Suddenly, Keanu Reeves wasn't just back, he was essential. Every studio wanted their own Keanu Renaissance project. His quote went from $3 million to $15 million overnight. But even at this pinnacle moment, Keanu felt nothing. "I had everything I'd lost," he reflected to a friend, "except any ability to enjoy it. Success felt like performing happiness for people who needed me to be okay." The preparation had reopened wounds that never healed. He'd spent months becoming a character defined by loss, and when filming ended, he couldn't find his way back to whoever Keanu Reeves was supposed to be. The film that saved his career had cost him something harder to define, the last pretense that he'd ever truly recovered from his losses. John Wick made him bankable again, but it also made him confront the truth he'd been running from. He was already the character, a man who'd lost everything that mattered and kept moving only because stopping meant acknowledging the emptiness. By 2003, Keanu Reeves wasn't just a movie star. He was Hollywood's most bankable action hero, commanding $15 million plus 15% of gross for the Matrix sequels, standing at the apex of a franchise that redefined cinema and earned $1.6 billion worldwide. His net worth had exploded to $350 million, though he'd already given away $75 million to the special effects and costume teams, claiming they deserved it more. He owned properties he never visited, motorcycles he rarely rode, everything except what he'd lost. The man who'd been called furniture was now Hollywood's most powerful actor, able to greenlight projects with his involvement alone. But even at this impossible height, Keanu was hollowing out from grief that made success feel like performing happiness at a funeral. The public saw triumph after triumph. The Matrix Reloaded, earning $742 million. The Matrix Revolutions completing the trilogy. Constantine proving he could carry films beyond Neo. But privately, Keanu was barely functioning after the devastating 1-2 punch that had destroyed him. In 1999, his girlfriend Jennifer Syme delivered their daughter Ava stillborn at 8 months. The grief destroyed their relationship. 18 months later, Jennifer died in a car accident after leaving a party at Marilyn Manson's house. Prescription medication in her system suggesting she'd been self-medicating the same grief. "I had everything except the two people who mattered," Keanu would later tell his sister in a rare moment of honesty. "Success became the noise I used to drown out the silence they left behind." The coping mechanisms were invisible, but constant. Keanu would disappear between takes, sitting alone in dark corners of sets, sometimes found hours later, having lost track of time. He gave away his profit participation to crew members, not from generosity, but from a belief that keeping money from films made during his grief would somehow jinx any future happiness. He'd ride his motorcycle at dangerous speeds through Mulholland Drive at night, later admitting he was testing if the universe wanted me to stay. The famous Sad Keanu meme from this period, him sitting alone on a bench eating a sandwich, wasn't staged. It was just Keanu existing between obligations, no longer able to pretend away the emptiness. Working with the Wachowskis, Hugo Weaving, and Lawrence Fishburne, Keanu became known as the most generous actor in Hollywood, paying for crew members' medical bills, buying the stunt team Harley-Davidsons, taking massive pay cuts so producers could afford other actors. What they didn't know was this wasn't kindness. It was survivor's guilt monetized. "Money felt like blood money," he once told his business manager. "Every dollar I earned was a dollar I couldn't spend on them, so I gave it to anyone else." Success is the cruelest joke when you have no one to share it with, Keanu told his therapist during this period. "Everyone sees Neo, the chosen one. I see a man who couldn't save the only two people who chose him." By 2005, at the absolute peak of his powers, Keanu Reeves had everything: franchise success, critical respect, unlimited opportunities. But he also had a grief so profound it made him question reality itself, wondering if he'd died in that car with Jennifer and everything since was just his dying brain's fantasy. The Matrix had made him the most powerful actor in Hollywood, but he'd have traded it all for 5 more minutes with his daughter, one more conversation with Jennifer, any reality except the one where he succeeded at everything except keeping the people he loved alive. Keanu's relationship with Jennifer Syme in 1998 had begun with a desperate hope of two damaged people who thought shared sadness meant compatibility. She was David Lynch's assistant, dealing with her own demons, and he was still running from abandonment that started when he was 3. They met at a party for Lynch's company, bonding over their mutual discomfort with Hollywood's false happiness. Within a year, Jennifer was pregnant, and for the first time since his father left, Keanu allowed himself to imagine permanence, a family, a home, someone who wouldn't leave. "I thought I'd found my answer," Keanu would later tell his sister Kim. "Someone who understood that life was mostly pain with occasional breaks. But we were both drowning. We just confused that for swimming together." The stillbirth of their daughter Ava on December 24, 1999, 8 months into pregnancy, destroyed more than their relationship. It destroyed their to exist in the same space without being reminded of what they'd lost. The grief was too heavy for two people to carry together. They split weeks after the funeral, unable to look at each other without seeing Ava's absence. Jennifer spiraled into prescription medication. Keanu retreated into work, taking any role that would keep him moving. "Love became synonymous with loss," he admitted years later. "We couldn't comfort each other because we were each other's worst trigger." Then came April 2, 2001. Jennifer died in a car accident after leaving a party, her Jeep hitting 3 parked cars before rolling. She was 28. The coroner found antidepressants and muscle relaxants in her system. Keanu had to identify her body, seeing the woman he'd planned a life with reduced to a police report. At her funeral, he stood apart from everyone, later saying, "I felt like I'd killed her by not being enough to keep her here." The double loss, Ava, then Jennifer, created a grief so complete that Keanu stopped attempting relationships entirely for over a decade. The pattern that emerged was deliberate isolation disguised as kindness. Keanu dated sparingly, Claire Forlani briefly in 2004, China Chow in 2008, but ended each relationship before it could deepen. "I'm broken in ways that would hurt anyone who got close," he told Forlani when ending things. He developed a reputation as Hollywood's eternal bachelor, the nice guy who'd take you to dinner but never let you stay the night, who'd be perfect, except for the wall you could never get past. Friends described him as present, but unreachable, generous with everything except emotional intimacy. Alexandra Grant entered his life in 2009 as a collaborator on art books, spending a decade as his friend before they became romantic around 2019. Their relationship was different, built on shared creative work rather than passion, understanding rather than intensity. "She doesn't try to fix me," Keanu explained to a friend. "She just exists alongside my damage without demanding I heal." They appeared publicly together, causing sensation because Keanu hadn't been seen with anyone consistently since Jennifer. But even with Alexandra, friends noticed the careful distance, separate homes, measured affection, the sense that Keanu was participating in a relationship rather than truly being in one. "I learned that love means loss," Keanu finally admitted in therapy at 58. "Everyone I've loved has left. My father through addiction, Jennifer through death, Ava before she could arrive. So now I practice preventive grief. I keep everyone at a distance that won't destroy me when they inevitably disappear." The man who played romantic leads couldn't risk actual romance, had replaced intimacy with kindness, connection with charity. He gave everything away, because keeping anything meant it could be taken. In March 2020, Keanu Reeves was filming The Matrix Resurrections when he collapsed between takes, his body finally rebelling against decades of untreated trauma, manifesting as severe panic disorder and complex PTSD that had been misdiagnosed as exhaustion for 20 years. The immediate trigger was a scene requiring him to film in water, unconsciously recreating the conditions of Jennifer's accident. His heart rate spiked to 180, he couldn't breathe, and his left arm went numb. Classic panic attack symptoms that the on-set medics initially treated as a cardiac event. The diagnosis that followed revealed what those closest to him had suspected. Keanu had been functioning with severe anxiety disorder since 1999, self-medicating through extreme physical training and work addiction that masked symptoms as dedication. The exact moment of realization came during mandatory psychological evaluation for insurance purposes. When asked about his last good night's sleep, Keanu couldn't remember one since before Ava's stillbirth. Brain scans revealed his amygdala, the fear center, was hyperactive even at rest. His cortisol levels were 3 times normal. "I've been in fight-or-flight mode for 2 decades, he told his doctor. "I thought that was just how life felt." The physical manifestations were extensive. Chronic insomnia requiring increasing doses of sleep medication, tremors in his hands he hid by always holding something, inability to eat solid food during filming because anxiety made swallowing feel like choking. The treatment plan revealed how deeply Keanu had been suffering. He required daily therapy, anti-anxiety medication he'd always refused, and EMDR therapy for trauma he'd never processed. The therapist discovered Keanu couldn't recall huge chunks of 2000 to 2001, his brain having essentially deleted the period around Jennifer's death. "We found trauma on top of trauma," his psychiatrist later noted in anonymized case studies. Childhood abandonment complicated by adult losses, creating complex PTSD that manifested as extreme people-pleasing and inability to form attachments. The famous kindness everyone praised was partially a trauma response, giving everything away, because keeping anything triggered anxiety about losing it. During filming breaks, Keanu would have dissociative episodes where he'd forget where he was, who he was playing, sometimes even his own name. The crew built in wellness breaks every 2 hours, where Keanu could ground himself. Lana Wachowski later revealed they'd essentially filmed around his condition, using doubles for scenes that triggered him, adjusting the script to accommodate his limitations. "We were making a movie about resurrection with someone who was psychologically dying," she said. "The irony wasn't lost on us. Recovery became about management rather than cure." Keanu's daily routine now included 2 hours of therapy work, meditation, journaling, exercises to stay present. He couldn't film scenes involving loss without advanced preparation. Loud noises triggered panic. He developed claustrophobia that made interior scenes torture. The motorcycle rides he was famous for became therapeutic necessities, the only time his mind could quiet. "Mental illness doesn't care that you're John Wick," Keanu observed. "It finds you anyway." The diagnosis was almost a relief, Keanu admitted to Alexandra Grant. 20 years of thinking I was weak for not getting over it, and it turns out my brain was literally damaged by trauma. The permanent effects were undeniable. Keanu would always need medication, would always struggle with attachment, would always be managing rather than cured. The action hero who performed his own stunts couldn't perform basic emotional functions without chemical assistance. The man who saved the world as Neo couldn't save himself from his own mind's betrayal. But at least now he knew why every day felt like drowning. He'd been holding his breath since 1999. The call came at 4:22 a.m. on August 27, 2023, while Keanu was in Berlin filming BRZRKR, his phone lighting up with his sister Kim's name, never a good sign at that hour. Her voice was steady but broken. "Karina is gone." Their youngest sister, Karina Miller, had passed away at 57 from complications related to the same rare blood cancer she'd been fighting for a decade. Keanu sat in his hotel room for 6 hours, unable to move, unable to cry, unable to process that death had found his family again. "I thought I was prepared," he would later tell Kim. "She'd been sick so long." But you're never prepared to lose another person you love. You just get better at pretending you'll survive it. Karina had been the stable one, the sister who'd chosen a quiet life away from Hollywood, raising her daughter in Toronto while Keanu became famous. She'd been diagnosed with chronic lymphocytic leukemia in 2013, but kept it private, not wanting to be Keanu Reeves' dying sister in tabloids. Keanu had quietly paid for experimental treatments in Switzerland, flew in specialists from MD Anderson, bought her a house closer to the hospital. But money couldn't buy time. In her final years, she'd grown frustrated with Keanu's inability to be present, even when he was there. "You're so busy running from your ghosts that you're missing the living," she told him, during what would be their last real conversation. The funeral was small, family only, held in Toronto where they'd spent their teenage years. Keanu attempted to deliver a eulogy, but broke down reading the words "baby sister," unable to continue. Kim had to finish while Keanu stood frozen at the podium, staring at nothing. "He wasn't crying," their mother Patricia observed. "He'd gone somewhere inside himself, that place he goes when things hurt too much." The burial was private, but photographers caught Keanu afterward, sitting alone in the cemetery for 3 hours, talking to the headstone like Karina could hear him. What the public never knew was that Karina's death triggered a cascade of loss examination. She was the 4th significant death in Keanu's inner circle. His best friend River Phoenix in 1993, Ava in 1999, Jennifer in 2001, now Karina. "I'm starting to think I'm cursed," he told his therapist. Everyone I love dies young. Maybe staying distant isn't selfish. Maybe it's protective. He became obsessed with mortality statistics, calculating the odds of experiencing this much loss, convincing himself he was statistically anomalous, that death followed him like a shadow. The aftermath was brutal. Keanu couldn't return to filming for 3 weeks, the longest break he'd taken in decades. When he did return, crew members noticed he'd aged visibly. More gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes, a slowness to his movements that suggested exhaustion beyond physical. He began visiting Karina's grave weekly when in Toronto, bringing her favorite flowers, updating her on films she'd never see. She was my connection to who I was before everything went wrong, he explained to Kim. Now that anchor is gone. The loss changed his relationship with his surviving family. He became almost obsessively protective of Kim, calling multiple times daily, hiring security for her without asking, treating every goodbye like it might be final. With his mother, Patricia, now in her 80s, he struggled to connect, their relationship still colored by childhood abandonment. "I'm running out of people to lose," he said during a particularly dark moment. "Soon, it'll just be me and the ghosts." Karina's death wasn't just losing a sister, it was confirmation of a pattern he'd suspected, that love in his life was always temporary, always ending in loss, always leaving him more alone than before. By 2008, Keanu Reeves sat atop a fortune worth $360 million, owned multiple properties including a $5 million Hollywood Hills compound, and had just launched his own motorcycle company, Arch Motorcycle, pursuing passion over profit. But what the world didn't know was that Keanu had been systematically giving away his wealth for years, not from generosity, but from a deep-seated belief that keeping money from films made during his grief would somehow perpetuate his losses. Between 2003 and 2008, he'd given away an estimated $125 million to crew members, to cancer research after Karina's diagnosis, to children's hospitals, always anonymously, always deflecting when questioned. "I went from wealthy to deliberately less wealthy," Keanu admitted to his accountant. "Money felt like evidence of survival I didn't deserve." The career implosion was swift and public. The Day the Earth Stood Still in 2008 earned $230 million, but critics called Keanu wooden, lifeless, going through the motions. 47 Ronin in 2013 became one of Hollywood's biggest disasters, costing $225 million, earning $151 million, essentially blacklisting Keanu from major studios. Directors who'd fought for him stopped calling. His quote dropped from $15 million to $2 million. "I went from Neo to nobody in 5 years," he observed. "The same executives who'd begged for my involvement suddenly forgot my number." Behind the scenes, the financial restructuring was deliberately self-sabotaging. Keanu refused profit participation, took scale payments for independent films, funded projects that would never see release. He kept his Hollywood Hills home, but lived in hotels, owned motorcycles worth millions, but took public transportation. His business manager discovered Keanu had been paying for strangers' medical bills he'd read about online, funding film crews' children's educations, essentially operating as an unlicensed charity. He was trying to buy karma, the manager later revealed, giving away money to balance cosmic scales, believing if he had less, he'd lose less. The survival tactics weren't about maintaining wealth, but avoiding it. Keanu took any role offered, Generation seen by virtually no one, Man of Tai Chi, which he directed, and lost $5 million of his own money, voice work for video games that paid union minimum. He'd show up to sets in the same outfit he'd worn for years, driving a 1973 Norton Commando held together with tape. "Rock bottom for me wasn't being poor," he explained. It was realizing I was sabotaging success because success reminded me of everything I'd achieved while Jennifer and Ava were gone. The slow rebuild came not from desire, but necessity. John Wick in 2014 paid just $1 million up front. Keanu took it because he needed to work, needed the physical pain of training to quiet mental anguish. The franchise's success restored his bankability, but not his relationship with money. He still gives away most earnings, lives simply, treats wealth like a disease he's managing. Money is just abstract numbers that represent time I'll never get back, he said. Every dollar I earn is a minute I wasn't with people who are now dead. So I give it away, hoping someone else's minute matters more. By 2020, his net worth had stabilized around $380 million. But Keanu lives like someone worth nothing, having learned that the only thing worse than losing everything is having everything without anyone to share it with. By 2024, Keanu Reeves' appearance at Comic-Con became uncomfortable viewing when he struggled to remember basic plot points of John Wick 4, staring blankly when asked about scenes he'd filmed just months earlier. His publicist stepping in to redirect questions while Keanu sat frozen in visible confusion. What the public didn't know was that Keanu had been experiencing significant memory issues related to his complex PTSD and chronic insomnia, sometimes going 5 days without real sleep. His brain essentially shutting down non-essential functions like memory formation to maintain basic operation. I exist in a constant present, he told his doctor. Yesterday feels like years ago. Last year might have been yesterday. Time has no meaning when you don't sleep. The cognitive decline manifested in increasingly visible ways. During filming of BRZR, Keanu would forget character names mid-scene, requiring cue cards for simple dialogue. He'd repeat the same stories to crew members multiple times daily, unaware of previous tellings. The famous preparation he was known for became impossible. He couldn't retain choreography, needing moves broken into single steps repeated hundreds of times. "We're watching someone disappear while performing," a crew member revealed anonymously. "He shows up, does the work, but there's nobody home behind those eyes." Public speculation about his condition became entertainment. Social media exploded with videos analyzing his vacant stare, comparing recent interviews to older ones, diagnosing everything from dementia to drug abuse. The sad Keanu meme evolved into Dead Inside Keanu, with comments sections filling with cruel observations about his monotone delivery and delayed responses. When he appeared at the Oscars appearing confused about where to stand, forgetting to acknowledge his co-stars, it went viral as Keanu's senior moment despite him being only 60. The isolation had become complete self-imprisonment. Keanu lived alone in his Hollywood Hills house, refusing most visitors, communicating primarily through assistants. Friends reported he'd become paranoid about forming connections, convinced anyone getting close would die. He'd installed extensive security not for protection, but to monitor who might be trying to reach him, preemptively cutting off relationships before they could deepen. "I've become a ghost," he admitted during a rare honest moment. Present, but not participating. Visible, but not really there. Recent controversies only deepened his withdrawal. His relationship with Alexandra Grant became increasingly strained as she struggled with his emotional unavailability. She told friends he'd sometimes forget they were together, introducing her as his friend or colleague after years of dating. His massive donations to charity were revealed to include giving away film memorabilia he didn't remember owning, including the original Matrix costume he'd promised to a museum. An interview where he claimed to be happy while exhibiting clear signs of dissociation went viral as Keanu Reeves has given up. "I've become what I always feared," Keanu confessed to his therapist during a breakthrough session. "Someone going through the motions without feeling anything. I perform Keanu Reeves every day, but I don't know who that is anymore. I smile because it's expected. I show up because contracts require it. But inside, I'm just waiting for everyone else to leave first this time. The man who'd survived unimaginable losses was finally facing the cruelest one, the slow erosion of himself, not through death, but through the inability to form new memories, new connections, new reasons to keep performing happiness. At 60, Keanu Reeves had become his own ghost, haunting a life that looked successful from the outside, but felt like an endless loop of loss from within. Today, at 61, Keanu Reeves lives not as the action hero who saved humanity in multiple franchises, but as a man who has learned that sometimes survival itself is the cruelest fate. He rises each morning in his Hollywood Hills home, taking medication for anxiety he'll never overcome, checking his phone for messages from people he keeps at calculated distances, preparing for another day of performing Keanu Reeves while the real person remains locked somewhere inaccessible even to himself. What remains is the work, showing up to sets, delivering lines, completing contractual obligations. His net worth of $380 million ensures security but brings no comfort. He still gives most of it away, still rides the subway, still acts like someone who has nothing because inside, that's exactly what he has. The universal message in Keanu's story speaks to anyone who has confused survival with living, who performs happiness while dying inside, who has lost so much that feeling nothing seems safer than risking more pain. Your struggle is real. Your grief is valid. Sometimes just continuing is heroic. If this story moved you, share your thoughts below. Leave a like for the human being behind the hero.